Welcome to Invest Out West podcast. I'm Nat Micken.
And I'm Kahlia Micken. We are a husband and wife team who live and invest in Western Queensland.
Join us on our journey of creating passive income through mindset, business, crypto, and property investing. Welcome to our 5th episode of Invest Out West podcast.
Today we wanted to lead with a quote from Ryan Sohern that says, "We didn't come this far to only come this far."
Yeah, so this is part 2 of our Richmond podcast series, Richmond, North Queensland 4822. Last episode we went into detail about some of the industries that's going on in the Richmond area, across the Richmond Shire. So there's vanadium mining, there's gold mining. Them two industries are coming into the Richmond area over the next couple of years. Then there's the copper string project that we detailed in the last podcast. So a couple of other things that we didn't mention. So there's another vanadium company. Their previous name was Curry Rose. But they had a name change on the 18th of October this year. Now they're called Velox Energy Materials. Now they're a Canadian company. Now their ticker on the Canadian Stock Exchange on the TSXV. Their previous ticker was CUI, but now they're VLX. I looked at their share price a couple of days ago, and they're trading at around about 6.5 cents. Now, we don't have any shares in that company, but we do have a deal with them where they lease some land off us on one of our properties, and they just use that for storing core samples and stuff like that. So we do have an interest in that company, even though we don't own shares with them. Now, they did some drilling in September of this year on their lease, which is north of Richmond. They did 10 100mm holes, and like I said, that was in September, and now them core samples have been taken to Gladstone, to the lab there for analysis. Now, a couple of other things that happens around Richmond. A really big industry is tourism. You've got dinosaurs. Some of the dinosaurs in around the Richmond area found only there, nowhere else in the world. Many years ago, the Richmond area was an inland sea, and the rich black soil country that makes up the Richmond area is, well, once upon a time was the seafloor. Now that rich black soil ground there is highly fertile. Some of the best grasses in Australia, Mitchell and Flinders grasses, they grow native in the Richmond area. And another industry that is emerging is cropping. So there never been a lot of cropping in the Richmond area before, but in recent times, sort of over the last 10 years, you could say, there has been cropping starting to come into the area. Mostly cotton and sorghum are the two major things. There is a little bit of other crops starting to come in as well, but that is an industry that is going to emerge and really come to the forefront probably over the next, say, 20 years. It's going to really change the landscape of Richmond. And so we have one of our cattle properties in the Richmond Shire, and we are doing trials as well with a little bit of cropping, and that we've been doing that over the last couple of years, and we're continuing to do trials with that as well. So another industry in Richmond is sandalwood. So there's a sandalwood processing factory in Richmond, and that is the only sandalwood factory in Queensland. Now, that sandalwood product is mainly exported to Asia, and the Richmond Shire economy is a 36.2 million a year economy, and that's a fairly big number for such a small population, and I believe that number is only going to go up from here, and so that is why we are investing in Richmond as much as we can at the moment, because we can see the potential upside. So this brings us into what we have in terms of real estate in Richmond. Now we've got a residential house, we have an industrial shed, and we have a small self-storage facility. We also have a vacant block in town that we use for ourselves as well, but we won't go into them figures here because that is just for our own use. So all of these properties that we're going to talk about are all tenanted, and Kahlia's got the figures here, and yeah, you want to talk about some of that?
Yeah, so the first piece of investment land that we bought in Richmond was our industrial block. So when we bought that, it was part of the new industrial area that had been released in Richmond. When we went in there was hardly any of them, so there was only just a hatful of people who had bought some, and so we could just drive around and pick the best block that we felt would suit what we wanted. So the only thing that had happened to that land obviously was that it was surveyed and the council had put water to the boundary. So we looked around there and we found a corner block that suited what we wanted. It's 2,475 square metres, and we paid $13,600 for that land. At that time, the council was selling it for $5.50 a square metre. And so when we purchased that, there was quite a bit of doubt in amongst the community, saying that part of town was never going to take off and it was going to be a bit of a white elephant. But it wasn't long after we bought ours that the rest of that area sold, and now there is more demand. People are wanting more industrial blocks now because there's no more available. So we just happened to jump on that ship at the right time, and we got a really good, not only a good position, but a really good, price for that block. Now, since then, that's where we've built our industrial shed and our self-storage facility. So I've got a few figures here on all that. So the total setup cost for the shed, by the time we, done all the groundworks, we, laid the concrete, built the shed, put in the toilet, put in the office, the electrical, plumbing, all these sorts of things, was a total of about $106,000. And so when you add that to the land cost of $13,600, that brings you to almost $120,000. So we outlaid $120,000 for a 2,475 square metre industrial block that was ready to be tenanted. And so we've had tenants in there for quite a while now. It was only vacant for a little bit at the start when after we first had the shed built. But we've had quite a bit of demand for it since then. At this point, the return on the shed and the land is sitting at 11.59%, and so quite a good return off that one. So that's just. So as Nat was saying, we've got the two incomes off one block. So the shed, as I was saying, is tenanted, and then we've also got our self-storage facility there. So at this point, the self-storage facility in Richmond on that block has got five units on it, 5 shipping containers, what we use for units. And the average cost that we purchased those containers for was $5,500. And when I've added in the extra cost of that, the freight, a bit of maintenance on the containers, and the setup costs and such things, when I work out the figures on our quarterly lease prices, it comes back at a yield of 28%. just for that one facility, 28% yield, and so very that's a very good return, and at that rate, it only takes 3.6 years to pay off its own container before that income becomes 100% passive. Now, when I added them figures together, both the industrial shed and the self-storage facility, which is on that one block of land, that brings it up to a 14.59% yield. So for the whole industrial block, that's what we've got, a 14.59 yield. So quite happy with that. Now moving on to our residential house in Richmond. We bought this one back in January 2021. Now this house that we bought, it backs onto the other block in Richmond that we use for ourselves, so what we call our private block, and so we own right through on that particular from street to street on that block. Now, when we went and looked at this house, it is a 2-story house, so 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 2-story house, and quite nice, very well looked after. And when we went and looked at it, this house comes on a block of 2,023 square metres. Now, the house itself is situated at the front of the block, so that there's a significant amount of room at the back of the block where you could do, future development on there. And so that was our vision when we bought this. We said not only could we make it into a investment property, we could also add a second residence at the back, and so you can create 2 incomes off one block. And so we paid $165,000 for that block back in January 2021. So that one there has been tenanted the whole time. I've worked out some figures of what we get for a return on that, and it's currently sitting at a return of 8.48%. And so I went back and found all my figures from 12 months ago, and with the increases of both rates, like council rates and insurance, that property has lost 0.5% of yield. So 12 months ago, it was pulling 8.98%, so 0.5%. So I just wanted to point that out, just to show how much you've got to be onto, all of your figures, and onto how much rent and return you're getting, so you can see how you've got to move your rent up with the cost of the extra rate and the extra insurance. So in Richmond, particularly, the council have just introduced a whole new town water system. So that's why the rates in town in Richmond have been bumped up, because they've got this whole new system. So yeah, we're quite happy with that return. It's a bit under the 10% that we aim for, but like I was saying, this house we did pay a bit more for it firstly because it joins us, so back to back, and secondly because it's got potential for future development in there. Now I just quickly want to touch on how we go about getting tenants in that, mostly for our residential house. We don't use any real estate agents to manage our properties. I do it all myself. So I send out all the forms, but people apply direct to me. I do all of my own due diligence. They've got to tick my boxes before they get to live in our house. And so I'm quite strict with my due diligence leading into a tenant. And at the end of the day, I'm the one who's wholly responsible. If I put in a wrong tenant, then that comes back on me, and I can't cast the blame onto anybody else. So that's a system that I personally really like, because I feel like as though we can keep our finger on the pulse. And yeah, we sort of have a really good system where we talk to the tenants and we have a really great relationship with them. And we can sort of manage our houses and even our industrial, as we like. So I think that's all that I've got to share here now about figures and that.
Yeah, no, that was good. Just going into a little bit more detail about the industrial, as Kahlia was saying, a return of 11.6% compared to the residential. This is why we like the industrial and want to get more into industrial as time goes on, because the return is so much better. But then once you look at the storage, the self-storage, a return of 28%, that just blows everything else out of the water. Now, we haven't forgotten residential. Like, we still are buying and looking at residential and industrial, but our big focus has shifted on to self-storage. Now, we've got two self-storage facilities, one there in Richmond and another one in Cloncurry, which the Cloncurry facility will go into detail in a future episode. So I just believe self-storage is the king of all property investments. Like I said in a previous episode, when you own the facility, a self-storage facility, there's basically it's nearly like double dipping. You've got the income of the business, of the self-storage business coming in, but you've also then got the capital growth on the facility. So that is the difference with self-storage. It is actually a business. It's not just a real estate investment, and you've got to run it like a business. But it comes with all the perks of a real estate investment and better. So that's probably a fairly good wrap up of our Richmond. What we've got going on in Richmond at the time being. Like I said, we're still buying and looking at different things to go down, different paths to go down in Richmond at the moment, and we'll talk about what we acquire when they happen in future podcasts. But like we said in the last episode, we're really bullish on Richmond. We reckon it's got a lot of potential still to come with the industries that are opening up. There's already such strong demand for rentals of every description in Richmond now. Without the future demand, what is projected to come online in the future. So, did you want to have?
Yeah, there was just something I forgot to mention about the industrial block that we've got. Now, most times when you've got with renting out industrial or commercial properties, all the outlays go to the tenant's responsibility. But we have a different system in Richmond, just because we do have our own self-storage facility on the same land as the industrial shed. So our tenant of the shed pays all of their own outgoings, but we pay the rates because we've got our own business on there. So I just want to touch on that because someone might have some questions as to how we manage that, but that's how we've got it set up, that we pay for the council rates and our tenant in the shed pays for everything else for their own outgoings.
Yeah, and obviously the tenant there pays the power because the self-storage has no power connected, which that is a big advantage of self-storage. You don't need power connected. It's only once you get into the likes of climate-controlled storage and that sort of thing where you need electricity, but otherwise, it's just sort of a set and forget sort of a scenario. So I think that's probably about all we've got to cover on Richmond for the time being, and keep living the dream.